All right. Good evening. I want to welcome everyone to September 4th, 2024 Planning Board meeting. If that said, Charlene, call the roll, please.
Anthony,
Present.
Aaron Robinson,
Yep.
Lori Millette,
Here.
Tim Moore,
Here.
I'm Alberti.
Excuse.
Dan Kane,
Here.
Nolan Pelletier,
Present.
Bill Coy,
Here.
Jada Roche,
Here.
and Jen Ryan.
Also here.
All right. All right. If you haven't already done it, please take a look at the minutes.
Yep.
And if there are no changes, then I'll entertain a motion to accept them.
I'll make a motion to accept the minutes of August 21st, 2024.
Second it?
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain?
Abstain.
One, two abstentions. So what's that?
302.
And then
302?
abstentions.
302.
02.
All right. And that's it. Jen Rowden, up from Housing Opportunity Grant, next funding round. Jen Rowden, Land Use Program Manager, Rockingham Planning Commission. So,
Right. Well, thank you all for having me back. I have worked with some of you, and some of you are some new faces. So again, I'm Jen Redden, Land Use Program Manager at Rockingham Planning Commission. So sorry I wasn't able to attend your last meeting because of technology glitches, but I'm glad to be here. So I'm here to talk to you about the next round of housing opportunity grants that have been put out by the state. This is sort of a follow-up conversation to the work that Plastow had really been doing over the last 2 years. I've given each of you a full copy of the grant application and then sort of a summary of how we got to where we are and then what some potential next steps will be. I'll walk through it, but it's so that you'll have something to take home and have in writing. So the basic overview of the Housing Opportunity Grant through Invest New Hampshire is a recognized need at the state level to be able to work with municipalities who have a large say over the housing development in the state to address the fact that there is a housing shortage in the state. Almost every community in the state is facing a lack of housing, included in that a lack of affordable housing and housing diversity, of which Plastow is not unique in also meeting some of those needs. So with the first Housing Opportunity Grant, the RPC worked with Plastow to help write the grant, and then on the actual tasks that we did, there were really 5 main tasks that were accomplished. The first 2 were really related to public education and outreach, hearing from people in Plastow, getting a better understanding as to what the needs were, what some of the data is, and then also informing about some of the laws that are on the books in the state of New Hampshire to get a better sense of how those needs, opportunities, the data fit in with a variety of other goals that have been expressed through your master plan. So we did a survey, we did a public outreach event to help sort of continue that conversation, because a lot of housing is recognizing these are people's homes, these are people's needs, and also understanding sort of the numbers and where we are. So that was all culminated in a housing master plan chapter that was adopted a few months ago by the planning board. We also did some further study in sort of that data piece by doing a build-out analysis. What a build-out analysis is basically taking your existing rules and applying it to what is currently on the ground to see, well, how much more housing or development could be developed in Plastow. We also did a second scenario where if you were to take some of the density in parts of town and just allow it to double, how much additional housing could you get? That resulted in about 7% increase of housing over if you did nothing to the rules. So you certainly could get more housing by simply doubling it. The third thing that we did was to do a land use regulatory audit. We've done this with a number of our communities, and basically what that did was look at the existing rules that you have on the books in your zoning, your site plan, your subdivision regulations, a few other places, to identify where there may be opportunities to change your local rules, where there may be barriers to changing rules. And the intent was for opportunity to develop more housing. So where might there be opportunity? Where might there be barriers? And I say barriers, which can be a good thing. Barriers to protect things like natural resources, open space, sense of community. Those are good barriers. So some of those are positive in nature. But where are the opportunities? Are there laws that you could amend and change slightly to make process easier, to make it clearer, more legally defensible? Are there things that you could leave in place because they really are a good fit for Plastow, or are there tools and regulations that you are allowed to adopt that may just not be the right fit for Plastow because they're really intended either for communities that have full water and sewer, or are denser, or in some cases are much more rural than Plastow. So that was what the land use audit did. So those were all of the things that have been done to date using the first round of the housing opportunity. That was about a $45,000 project. It was paid for fully by grant funds. Plastow got a little bit of funding to help cover some administrative costs under that grant. So that ended at the end of July. This next round of housing opportunity grants does give preference to any community that has already received a grant, of which Plastow has, to continue on with that work. And it's predominantly geared towards trying to do housing regulation amendments. So what are those rules that, based on all of that work and other pieces, that it may be worth having some additional technical assistance to actually move forward with zoning changes, site plan or subdivision regulation changes? Honestly, I know you guys have further on your agenda. What are you going to be working on in zoning this year? It's to help municipalities have more resources to move some zoning and regulations forward, should you want to. That might be beyond your current staff capacity. So that grant has come out. It is due on September 30th, so there is a window of time to be able to write a grant application. It's a pretty standard grant application. My office is helping a number of communities do that, some of your neighboring communities who are in similar places to Plastow. They may be on a slightly different plan for some of their aspects, but to try to help move things forward that help meet housing goals and needs of the community, but also help to promote those other goals that may be tangentially related to it. So basically just pulling everybody forward on this topic. So I have put in my sort of handout that I've given you probably the top 4 big picture items that we could really work on under this grant. I will say the grant is fully paid for with grant dollars. There is no match required other than staff participation and board participation. And the funds can go all the way through September 2026. They would be available no sooner really than December 1st of 2024.
So it's like 2 years then.
It's basically 2 years. It really only gives you a good shot at zoning changes in March 2026. You can do subdivision and site plan regulations anytime through that period. Very small changes could potentially be done for March 2025. Things like small language tweaks, definitions. The first bullet that you'll see is to bring Plastow into compliance with the state workforce housing law. This is the biggest one. So the finding that comes out of all of the work that we've done with the 10 different communities I've done iterations of housing evaluations on is that no community in southern New Hampshire is in compliance with the state workforce housing law, simply because no one has enough affordable housing, what qualifies as affordable. Doesn't matter what community you are in. The only way that a town can be in compliance with the state workforce housing law is if you have in your zoning an inclusionary housing ordinance. An inclusionary housing ordinance has specifications that basically say you are allowed to build affordable housing within the community. Allowed to being the key word. It does not mean it will get built. It does not mean that Plastow will build it. It just provides opportunity for building affordable housing. And a component of any housing that is being developed is affordable. There are income thresholds as to how much can it cost, how much can you sell it for, rent it for. It's intended to be an incentive to help increase affordability in communities. It basically comes out to say that 50% of your land needs to allow the construction of that type of housing. That is how you can be in compliance with the state workforce housing law without having just the natural affordability amount of housing in your community compared to the region and the state. So I know I just said a lot. Are there any questions on that law specifically, though?
Yeah. So let's say this was allowed and, you know, we built workforce housing. How does it stay affordable? Who oversees that?
So there are many different ways to sort of account for that, because that is a very big part of this, and it's a complicated part of it. But when you are having dedicated, qualifying workforce affordable housing, if it's going to be rented, the way most municipalities go about it, especially smaller, is to ensure that in the regulation, there is a management company that is required to be identified that helps to manage and verify the income levels of people to ensure that it stays affordable. If it is for ownership, the most common way is to actually have a restriction in the deed. That typically is the easiest and less administrative burden on a municipality. The renter version is doable, but it is a little bit more of an administrative hurdle. But those are the two main mechanisms.
And is it really just for land that's not developed yet?
No, the 50% is meant to be for the land area of town.
So what's developed and that includes what's already developed?
Correct. So the reality is that you probably will never fully reach what the state says the number of affordable housing units you should have.
There's not a whole lot of land left.
There's not a whole lot of land left. But allowing, in some places could be developed. Some, I think for Plastow, it would be much more redevelopment or increasing density in a few places. It's probably going to be small and incremental, meaning you get a few places here, you get a few places there. You're not likely to see, unless you got sewer, sort of big development in Plastow. It's just not realistic. So I like to emphasize with affordable housing and an inclusionary housing ordinance, that's what the term is. It's enabling it to be built. It doesn't mean it's going to be built. It's unlikely it's going to solve the housing crisis. It just is adding one more tool to enable the possibility. So that,
No, just a question before we get too deep into this. In terms of our, you know, if we were to go forward with, you know, an application for this grant, and we go through the whole process where, you know, you produce a work product, the board participates and such like that. What is this board's obligation, you know, at the end of it, like once you present your work product to us?
So the obligation, if it's a regulation, whether it's a really big one or a really small one, is that you're a willingness to work, a good faith effort, but ultimately working towards getting it onto a ballot or a public hearing. But if it doesn't pass, you're not obligated to keep trying. I mean, we would try to build it so that we would work towards public education and writing something that would be feasible to be able to pass. That would be the goal. But if it doesn't, you're not on the hook for anything. The only thing in the grant, and if you read into the details, you'll see it, if there's any regulation that is part of this, they do ask for 3 years after the end of the grant, which would be September 2026, just a willingness to keep reporting to the state whether or not additional efforts have been tried. You're under no obligation to adopt or enable any regulation. So it's a reporting requirement is really the only obligation long-term.
All right. And just the question that if we adopt, I mean, just hypothetically, if you have, let's say, some sort of, you know, housing that already exists and such, people selling houses or anything like that? Are they impacted in some way, any way in which, they can sell their house?
Someone that has an income restriction on their house, if it's like written into the deed, then they still can sell it, but it does reduce the amount that they can sell it for. It would have to stay as affordable over a certain term. It sometimes can
I'm
be
talking
10,
about
20 years.
a house that doesn't have, let's say we adopt whatever ordinance we have.
It would have no impact on any
Yeah.
existing housing.
So someone would have to affirmatively incorporate that language into their
The building.
house. If it's,
So it would really be future development or expansion of the number of dwellings if it was an existing lot. So if someone takes a big old home and divides it up into 6 apartments, you could write something into that rental agreement or that deed if it's a condo association that would have that kind of restriction.
okay, and you said they could do it.
They
But
could.
they could opt not to.
Yes,
Okay.
inclusionary housing ordinances are typically written in a way that they are meant to incentivize the development of workforce housing, but it is not a requirement. And that honestly, that's sort of the kind of detail that can be discussed once you get into the drafting of an ordinance, if that's one of the tasks that you may want to go for in applying for this, if you choose to apply.
Okay.
The 3 other items that I have on here for the reason I put the workforce housing one up there is simply because it's a compliance with the state law. And so doing it puts you into compliance. That's why it's our number 1 sort of recommendation for municipalities. The next 3 are sort of smaller regulations. So some of them might be they're called right sizing regulations. That can be allowing a little bit of increased density in some places. So allowing duplexes or multifamily in places in Plasta where they might not be currently allowed, expanding potentially accessory dwelling regulations as to what type, where, how many. It can also be things like reducing parking requirements. It can be things like allowing backlot developments that have maybe smaller frontage than your standard lots. There's a lot of small adjustments that can be made in zoning that do enable more housing opportunity, but are less impactful on a community because you can sort of fit it to the parts of town and make sure that the characteristics of those parts of town aren't being negatively impacted, whether that's natural resources or a community character or a neighborhood or sort of the historic district. So those can be adjusted a lot easier because they are smaller in nature. They also tend to produce not as much housing, but that slower pace is often more amenable to communities because it's sort of that natural development rather than seeing a whole lot of new housing at the same time. So that's what that second bullet is. The third bullet is really procedural and administrative things. So making sure that you don't have processes in your regulations that are an undue burden on development. That's not necessarily for larger developments, but really the smaller developments, someone wanting to add an accessory dwelling, someone wanting to build sort of that smaller multifamily, sort of like 3 to 6 unit type of developments. We're not talking about larger developments, just making sure that you're still getting the information you need to make good decisions, but you're not going overboard and making it so complex that it's hard for someone to even think about a project, or that it's not taking you a really long time that's costing potentially the town money and potentially an applicant a lot of time and money. So that's sort of what that third bullet is aimed at. The final one is aimed at your site plan and subdivision regulations, which typically are very small tweaks that end up happening, but it's adjusting it so that you're having those conversations of small administrative changes, small regulation changes where you might not require all the same level of information depending on an application. You may have cleaner language in some cases to make it just more legally defensible. And easier for everybody to administer and to understand whether or not a project is likely to be able to be approved easily. Those tend to really come up if you are having applications that are coming before you that you're having a hard time saying, why are they doing this? This doesn't fit what we're expecting. So trying to get more of those kinds of projects that by applying for it, a developer, whether it be big or small, has a good idea that yes, the planning board or the town should be able to say yes to this because I understand the criteria, I understand the process, and my project fits. It's not saying you shouldn't have regulation, it's just trying to make it more predictable for everybody, to make the process smoother so you're getting the applications you want that you can easily say yes to, and people aren't wasting their time and money and having a lot of like legal challenges. So that's kind of what that fourth bullet is aimed at. There can be a lot in all three of, especially those last three bullets that we could write in, but we can also write the grant application so it allows a lot of flexibility. So with that, my office can write a grant application for you if you're interested. It probably, depending on if you have any interest in doing an inclusionary housing ordinance, that would be sort of the big, I'll say the big ticket item, simply because it takes so much time and effort to write that because of the public outreach that would be required, because you really have to get the public to understand what you're doing to even have a shot at having an ordinance like that pass. So it does take a lot of effort, so it costs a little bit more money. Doing the other items can be scaled pretty easily depending on interest, time. So that's why you'll sort of see at the bottom of this one pager that you can ask for up to $100,000 in grant funds for this process. I don't think Plastow has any need for that level of grant funding. I don't think you probably have the interest, time in doing a project that large, but I do think that doing something in the ballpark of sort of that $15,000 to $20,000 range, depending on if you want to do any of these or just one of them, would probably be the right size of a grant application. I would have to work out all of the details, but that's probably the ballpark.
And if we don't come into compliance, is there any repercussions for that?
If you are not in compliance with the state workforce housing law, the negative side of that is that should someone come in and say, I want to build workforce housing, the town does not allow me to. There is in the state law what is known as a kind of a builder's remedy. They can take you to court, and then the court can approve that development proposal without consideration of basically anything other than basic natural resource protections. The height restrictions can be not followed of the local regulations. The density cannot be followed. Traffic studies can be taken as less impactful. The architectural impacts, the setbacks. So you get a lot less say in what a workforce housing development can look and feel like and where it can go if you do not have an inclusionary housing ordinance.
So coming into compliance, we tighten everything up, really is what it comes down to.
You tighten it up and you get a much bigger say in how such development could be developed that also matches your other community goals. So
So specifically on these, sort of the menu that we would have to choose from, what items would you recommend as being like, if we did pursue a grant for them, that would bring us, kind of give us the protection that we would need?
So some examples are accessory dwellings can always stand to have a additional conversation, whether that is what is allowed, how is it allowed, process it's allowed. Typically those smaller developments and understanding how those get approved in Plastow and what they look like and where they can go, whether that's duplexes or a very small multifamily development, that's often a good place to start. A very simple tweak that any municipality could make is in your site plan regulations, and actually it becomes a select board issue because it's building code, is to adopt, instead of the international building code, which is the standard in New Hampshire, but towns can have a different standard if they want, is for smaller developments, adopt the International Residential Code, which is still a good building code, but it has a smaller fire impact as far as how it's constructed. The fire rating systems are a little bit different because it is a smaller unit. So the requirements are a little bit less and less costly. So they are more cost effective to build. And it's really from that it can be up to 12 units that can fall under the International Residential Code. And it's something, as an example, if you went for that type of regulation, Conversation with the fire chief is always good to have, with the building inspector, but it's a small change that can be pretty impactful on someone developing housing. I will say all of this, well, the first one does talk about workforce housing. The rest of it impacts housing of all types. So one of the big things, as I try to emphasize, it's not just workforce or affordable housing, it is housing diversity. Plastow is one of our few communities that actually has pretty good housing diversity. So you have quite a variety of different housing types in Plastow. Most of them, however, are not affordable just because of the market. So
We do have an elderly housing ordinance.
You do.
So just because we don't have the workforce, doesn't it default to whatever allowances we give for elderly housing?
defaults to the density.
Right.
That does not automatically create workforce housing, nor does it make you in compliance with the state workforce housing law.
But it is something.
It is something. It is certainly a housing type. It at least can, in theory, help. That's sort of why it got passed by the state legislature. There were a lot of bills that were tried and conquered this past year, and almost all of them failed for a variety of reasons, but there is a lot of emphasis at the state level to address the fact that there is a housing crisis in New Hampshire.
So what do you need from us tonight? I mean, timeline-wise?
So timeline-wise, I know you guys have another meeting in 2 weeks, but it sounds like it's a very packed agenda. So I think for efficiency, if there is interest in doing this, it would be good for me to get a consensus of you that, yes, this is something you'd like to do, or some of it you might like to do. So I would have enough time to start drafting a scope of work. I would need for you at your next meeting or a different meeting before September 30th, you to give me the okay on the scope of work or any adjustments. And also a letter of support, that because it would really be Plastow applying. We can write the application, but it would really be Plastow applying. And that would have to be in by September 30th, which is a Monday.
So time's ticking.
So there is time. We can do it. There could be adjustments. You're not obligated, but I would need at this point at least a decent consensus that you would like me to move forward with some of this, none of it, all of it.
Well, let's have a little bit of open discussion on this then, and then we'll talk about, if there's a consensus of some kind. Jay?
Who would the letter of support come from?
It should come from the planning board, preferably with a vote and minutes attached. It could technically be the select board as well.
I would say move forward, right? Because you don't want to give up the right of having no say. That's the big piece of it, right? To come into compliance.
I disagree.
I think, at least from my perspective, I would like to have control, right? Be a master of our own destiny. I also, again, if there's money out there in which, we're sort of commissioning, outside experts to do additional work, to do some analysis, I have a little bit of a bias in that type of scenario.
Yep, I think getting the statement of work obviously doesn't commit us to anything at that point either, right?
I think that's important. Tim, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I think we should probably do the workforce housing. And also the last bullet, do a series of site plan and subdivision changes that would support the workforce housing. So some of those have been kind
So
of.
you're talking 1 and 4, Tim?
A few years ago, about 60 or 65% of our housing stock qualified as affordable. But since the market's gone crazy, I don't know, I haven't looked in a while. So it's Jen said, it's probably not that great anymore.
But affordable probably has also gone up as well as what's considered affordable.
So
Well, yeah, it's based on 30% of income in I think we're in the Lawrence urbanized area,
We are.
which, when we heard that, I thought, oh no, Lawrence, a little depressed. But it also includes Andover and Boxford.
Right.
So it's actually the average income, or used to be, was actually higher than Rockingham County.
Oh, right.
I mean, affordable could be like 350.
So affordable for
Right.
a home for purchase, and this does fluctuate based on
Like
interest.
this
and,
area.
Yeah, this area is
it's
right.
around $450,000.
Oh, okay. Well, there you go.
But I will.
And that doesn't seem affordable to younger people. They're thinking like 200,
Well, we have 2 developments that are going in now. What are the price of
Yeah.
those homes?
Those houses are what, $750,000, or even,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
The builder
sneaking
didn't
up
want
on
to do
a
anything
million.
else but that.
Right, exactly.
Well,
Well,
I
they
also
wanted to make
think,
money.
even though it's be a larger pain in the butt, I think we should focus on rental units. Because there's a severe shortage of rental units.
Until we know
I will
how.
say the rental versus ownership is certainly an important conversation.
Yeah.
It is not something that you have to decide to apply. It can be part of the
Yeah.
discussion of any ordinance development.
So
Did
hypothetically,
commun-
just hypothetically speaking, so let's say we have these ordinances in effect and you have a developer that comes in and wants to develop suddenly a plot of property, wants to develop. What does that look like? I mean,
So typically with inclusionary housing ordinances, you try to incentivize their use by giving density bonuses. So what that means is that where you'd normally only allow maybe 20 dwellings to be developed, you may allow 24. But a certain amount of them have to have that restriction on them, whether for sale or rent, of income. So you're maintaining that affordability for some of the units.
so if the developer, who hypothetically came in, just said that I have no interest in, exercising a density bonus and whatever, I
Then
want
they don't.
$750,000, they're going in 2.5 acres.
Standard subdivision or development. You're giving them the option because
Right, so-
sometimes they can make more
There's
money.
nothing-
They
by
have
so
an
doing
there's
it.
option.
nothing-
They don't
yeah.
have to do that.
There's nothing
don't have to.
compulsionary then.
Nope.
Okay.
Is there a monetary, like say if they paid 100,000, then they don't have to do it? Do you know what I mean? Like they can fall under this regulation, but we'll pay 100-something thousand, so we don't have to make it affordable. Isn't there something that, I thought I read something that the
So-
state included, that
There
they could almost
are-
buy their way out?
There are ways of incorporating that type of economic incentive, but it doesn't work out quite the way you're describing. The reason for allowing, so in my scenario of normally you could do 20, but you do the workforce housing, you can do 24. The reason that can sometimes tip the balance is because you're being able to build simply more units so you can recoup your cost a little bit better. That's why it incentivizes a developer to do it. Honestly, if it doesn't meet their bottom line, they're simply not going to. There's no requirement.
Mm-hmm.
Let's face it, the trend is towards bigger houses you see out there.
We just don't have the land. So, renting.
My view is to give us the maximum flexibility we can obtain. If we can get a grant to do it, all it does is make us less dumb, in another year and a half about what we have. And I would broaden this to get as much as we can, and give ourselves, so not just go for one aspect of it, go for it all. And I don't mean $100,000, but I mean, write the grant as broad as we kind of can, giving ourselves the options to look at everything.
That is the general approach we've been using when writing these grants, just to enable the flexibility. The one thing that it is a good thing to mention, if you want to do an inclusionary housing ordinance, that's the one ordinance that is good to call out, because it's highly fundable and it simply takes so much more effort than a lot of
Yeah.
other housing.
I would absolutely do that, whatever gets us the opportunity. Because we can always look, we can always evaluate, we can always deliberate and discuss. If we don't do this, we have no at bat here, and that doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, and you lose control.
Yeah.
No, I just wondered whether we should have to do all of it. I'm not against some of it.
Well, you're not doing all of it, you're evaluating all of it.
Did communities have to go through round 1 to get to round 2?
No, but because of this second round, communities that already have received a housing opportunity grant are given preference. So they will get funded first, and then whatever is left of the 2.9 million will go to communities that have not had any housing opportunity grant.
How much has been grabbed already, do you know?
None. They're only doing one grant round.
Okay.
The original one was sort of a rolling basis. This one is just 2.9 million is available. There are possibilities of future grants, but we have no idea of when, how much. So this is all we know about at this point, and this is all that is in the state budget.
So is the protection or, that were afforded, is it specific? Like if somebody were to come and, challenge us on a particular aspect, this doesn't this isn't like a generic protection that, hey, Plastow did this, so, they're really trying
It is
to.
a protection against the remedy in the workforce housing law. If you, I will say, make poor decisions, don't document things correctly, you still could be legally challenged, but it
As you
keeps you
should.
from being challenged by the workforce housing law.
Okay.
Have we ever been challenged with the workforce housing law in Plastow?
To my knowledge, no. It's only happened a few times in Rockingham County.
I just don't, it'd be great to be in compliance, but I don't know how much, we don't really have much land. I don't know if it's,
For what it's worth, I will let you know the few challenges that have been brought to court, the towns typically do not succeed.
Yeah. The batting average is low.
Then you go to court, it costs you money. And there's the way I look at it, there's a chance to get money for us to get this done and come into compliance.
I'm not opposed to putting.
That's how
I'm not
looking at it.
opposed. It was just a question out of,
Right.
No,
Yeah.
absolutely.
I just don't, it would be great to be in compliance. I just don't think we'll ever be in compliance, just with what we have available for land.
I will let you know that probably a third of your neighboring communities have inclusionary housing ordinances. Atkinson comes to mind, but
They
the
have
other
the land.
2/3 don't. And so I'm going to be working with the town of Newton on developing one, possibly Hampstead. So it is becoming more and more common to have one. It doesn't mean that you have to have one, but it is becoming more and more common.
I like the idea of having at least a buffer against it.
Against it.
I was just
Jay,
curious.
you
if
had
it's
something to
come
say.
up.
Yeah, that's all I was interested.
Yeah,
Yeah.
one question I had, it's more of a hypothetical, say we do the grant, we get the money, we do the study, we get everything in place, it passes, people start building workforce housing. And you talked about property management or putting something into the deed or of the property. Do you foresee any long-term costs associated from the town that would have to maybe add additional software, hire more people? Is there a cost impact to the town and the taxpayers by doing this?
Part of it does depend on what methodology you choose to have that income verification in the regulation.
Right.
If the requirement is that for rentals, there is a management company identified and they have to report annually, yes, there would be an administrative cost for someone to verify that at the town. Is it going to be huge? Not likely.
Okay.
If it is something that is within a deed for ownership, that typically has no bearing on the town.
Right. Okay.
So yes, there potentially could be some.
But minimal, we're not talking hundreds of thousands of dollars.
No.
Can I ask, so what would the verification look like? Is it someone going out and, auditing, or is it just, is it a
For-
certification?
For
Is-
rentals through a management companies, you have to basically include your pay stubs and tax forms.
Okay, okay.
So if you built it and you own it and it's in the deed, is it just written that like it goes whatever price with inflation, or how does
So,
that market? How does that?
HUD does adjust for, you talked about you guys are in the Lowell urbanized area. It is adjusted based on region, and yes, it does go up over time. You're not stuck at, I'll say, $100,000 forever. The one thing with ownership that has that income restriction for sale is that people aren't able to build as much capital into their homes, sort of as a capital investment into their homes, because they simply can't sell it for as much as the market may go up. So that's kind of the flip side of it, is you are keeping it affordable, but the people who may buy it and then go to sell it aren't able to profit
Get back.
at as high a rate.
Does it restrict them from getting equity loans to do improvements on the house?
It does not, but they're not able to build as much equity simply because they wouldn't be able to sell it for as high a rate, depending on, the time frame you're talking about.
It puts a ceiling on the appraised value.
Yeah.
All right, so what, do we need to formally do a
At least get a
consensus?
consensus, right?
All right,
Well, I think,
Karen's.
yeah, first, I wanted to know, there's 5 things here. Have we decided we're going to do all 5? I mean, I think that's where the conversation should be.
So the bullets, the top 5 bullets are things you've already done. That was the first round
Okay.
of grant.
All right.
The
Okay.
4 bullets are
4
really
bullets, okay.
the menu of items we could apply for.
Right, I guess that's what I'm asking. But we-
and that's on the one-page summary, right?
Yes, the one-page summary, top bullets you've already done. The bottom bullets are things you could do.
Isn't it really 2 things, though? Is the big thing is the inclusionary,
Right,
and
that's
the
what I'm
other
talking
3
about.
kind
One.
of,
The other 3 would become tasks under the grant, so that's why I wanted to bullet them out.
Yeah.
They are smaller in nature, so
but they're not all equal in terms.
no.
Yeah.
No. And education and outreach would have to go with any one of these bullets. It just would be scaled depending on the amount of changes that would have to occur and outreach that would need to occur. So the bigger the item, the more outreach. The smaller the item, the less outreach you need to plan for.
So I would list, the first and fourth bullets.
1 and 4?
Yeah.
Anyone else? First and fourth?
I-
The second and third have any?
I would add all 4.
Would you add all 4?
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't think the other 2, excluding them, is gains you much, in efficiency, if you will. And my vote would be to cast a wider net.
I agree.
If I had a vote, I would vote to cast.
No, I agree with you, Dan.
All right. So if we went with, let's say, everything, just sort of notionally or whatever, then, you'd put together sort of a next stage.
So the next stage would be me putting together what would be the scope of work. And I can include all 4.
Yeah.
I will say taking out sort of the bottom 3 is fairly easy to take in and out. But so you can see the whole scope of work.
Okay.
And then decide. It was really that, do you want to do any of it or the inclusionary housing? That was my main feedback I needed. So I can come back and have a scope of work for you to consider for your next meeting.
I think that makes sense. That
The
if
next meeting is going to be booked.
Yes, the next meeting is definitely going to be
The
booked.
meeting after, is that possible? Or wait,
So I
That's
think then
October.
you're running into
Oh, yeah.
October. That's too late.
The next meeting's the last one in September.
I have another question too. Scope of work. We had said this, 2023, we finally finished. It took us 2 years, 22 and 23. All our doings was definitely dedicated to housing. There was no doubt about it. So my point is, here we go again. What's going to take a second, like it always seems to happen. And the scope of work, obviously, this one looks like a little more And how much time are we going to have to literally spend on it to meet the qualifications?
So as far as time frame, it would at the earliest December of this year. I think realistically, January of 2025 is the earliest any work would really begin. And it would be predominantly for anything zoning next late spring, summer, and fall would be the bulk of it. So this time next year would be in the thick of any zoning regulation and drafting.
So it wouldn't be for this next March.
It would not be for this next March. The only thing for this next March potentially could be a small definition or a small procedural change. You would not have time to talk about it in
No.
order for
Okay.
March.
All right.
I don't have any interest in changing our density, like changing LDR to MDR. And I feel as though I'm not just speaking for myself. I hear it from residents. They don't want more housing. So for me, it's a no.
You don't want to see sort of a generic scope of work, you know.
Yeah, but how are we going to do that at the next meeting?
Well,
There's no way.
I mean, does it require a full presentation, or is it a question that?
So I can certainly send you the scope of work, and it would be a few days ahead of time for you to look at. And if you effectively agree with it, or we need to make some modifications, I can do that. But I would need you, I think, at that meeting to make a vote in support of the application, possibly with modifications.
So that would have to be the go, no-go day.
Yes, I mean, we can still make changes to it based on your conversation, but
I mean, either way, we're going to have to see a scope of work. I mean, we're not.
of course you'd have to.
I
see
mean,
a
you're not
scope of
looking
work.
for something where we're going to decide like, this is what we're going to do. Or I mean, maybe you are. I mean,
So you could have our admin send it out to us.
Yep.
And then at that meeting, we could, yes or no, is that what you're saying?
Yes.
yes.
So you don't have to come back and give us more information, because I don't think we'd have time for it that night.
Yeah, no, from what it sounds like, you don't have time
Yeah.
that night. But yes, I would be able to send you the scope of work. I'm not going to detail out, let's, change zoning 10.4.a. I'm not going to give you that level. It's going to be enough time and detail to work on a workforce housing ordinance, enough time and detail to work on potential other zoning changes, time and detail to talk about procedural aspects, time and detail to talk about site plan and subdivision changes, and some outreach.
And at any time, if we decide to stop, we can stop.
Yep. I mean, you do realistically have to go into this with a good faith effort.
No, and I agree that, but I'm just trying to.
Yep. But there's nothing that obligates you to voting to move something to warrant, nothing that obligates you to move it to a public hearing. You have to try and consider it.
Well, no,
That's
I think that part of it, I think that's fair enough here. I think what the concern here is whether or not, what we want to move forward with. And I think, to have something that's sort of a robust overview that we could either say yes or no to, I think is fair enough. I think.
I will let you know that especially an inclusionary housing ordinance, that will likely require some meetings like a subcommittee meeting outside of planning boards, just because of the depth and the detail that we would need to parse out. It just won't work well at full work sessions at the beginning. Of course, everyone would
we
be
have
for that.
subcommittees now.
Done in
that
March.
can
I'm
Swing
done.
some hammers on
We're
that.
done. You don't have
This
to worry
is it.
about it. I know.
So
I'm busy.
Enough subcommittees
busy,
right now.
All right, so
Subcommittees
I guess
are swapped.
we'll call. I mean, just let's have a roundtable consensus here. We'll start, Tim, on all points. You think? All right, Bill.
Yes.
All right, I'm a yes.
Okay, this is just to look at the scope of work that she's going to send out to
so
us?
that we can see the
Okay,
scope.
We'll look at it,
I'll
but we're not
I'll
voting
go along
for
with
it
that.
right now.
I'll go along with that.
But we have nothing
Scope.
really to vote on. We haven't seen the work, right?
Right,
So-
Right.
right,
Exactly.
right, okay.
I just want to be sure we do see it. Okay.
So are you a yes?
Yep.
Okay. So I think we have a consensus then.
Okay, and I will work to get this to you. It will be a couple of days before your meeting. It won't be a full week, I'll be honest with you, just because
All
of workload. But it'll be a scope of work that should give enough specificity that you understand what we'll be working on while also leaving it broad enough to allow flexibility.
And if you could just also, just the timeline, I mean, I know you said it here and it's
The
probably in
timeline
the
will be
minutes.
part of this.
Yeah, because I think that's the sense that, how much of a, work obligation is the board going to have? And it sounds like it's going to be over a period of time. Would require some subcommittee work, but it doesn't sound like it's going to preclude us from doing other things. So, all right.
Okay,
Thank you.
well, thank you for having
Thank
me.
you.
I'll
Thank you, Jen.
be in
Thank you.
touch.
Thank you.
Great. All right. 2025 Planning Department budget. Now, I think I was told that, like, budget need to be kind of submitted in some fashion or another the end of this week, so should probably just take a look on it. I think one of the notes that I got from Dee was that 3 points that she mentioned, master plan, engineering, and
Impact fee?
impact fees. But my understanding, though, is that we've sent out a request for proposal, but I mean, I don't think we've received anything back from that. So,
Not that I know.
I mean, so when we don't have any type of information, do we just put in a placeholder of some kind, or that makes a, I mean, I know it has to be in by, we'd like to have the information at the end of the week, but I mean, the budgeting process, I don't think this is necessarily.
I think I'd put 15,000 for impact fees, try to get them all updated, because they all need to be updated.
How much did you say?
15,000.
15,
I was thinking 20.
20. You're probably right, Lauren.
Well, like closer to, I bet it's gonna, I don't know, I just have this feeling like 30, 35, so I'm thinking if we do 20, I don't know, I think it's gonna be a lot.
Have we ever done them, when we did them last time, Tim, did we do them all at once? Was that, or did we do them in
No,
pieces?
we didn't do that a lot. We didn't do it all at once.
I think Bruce, we had Bruce Mayberry do them. Seemed like it was like $7,500, $8,000, and he updated public safety and the school one. So those were like $4,000 or $5,000 a piece or something.
How long ago was that?
4 or 5 years ago.
It was like 2018, wasn't it?
Yeah, that was.
So, I mean, those are usually doubled, so,
And nothing gets cheaper with time.
no, funny how that is.
So if you want to just throw 20 in, I mean,
Yeah,
just.
Because we're probably not gonna be doing anything with the master plan up, like for 2024, we have 10,000. I don't think we're doing anything from now to the end of the year. So if we
No.
don't budget for that next year either, and we just put 20 for impact fees, I think that's reasonable.
yeah.
So you're saying nothing for the master plan and put 20 for
We
impact?
had, no, we,
Well, aren't we working on it?
Well, for the master plan, what we're doing is what? What do we have?
We're gonna do economic development too.
Well, the implementation portion of the
We
economic.
have
development.
a little bit of a dilemma with the master plan. We had Steve Whitman, Resilience? Is that the name of his firm? I'm kind of forgot now. He used this InDesign program.
Oh,
Yep.
okay.
Um,
It's not compatible.
Victoria developed the housing chapter in Word. So we that I know of, we don't have a way to integrate the two.
Didn't well, it's kind of quick, get her in the parking lot now. RPC, didn't they say they were going to purchase a license of some kind, for the resilience to handle the updates? I think it's kind of what I vaguely remember.
I don't know.
All right, so if we were to do something with the master plans, what you're saying is that we have some editing, that we have incompatible software, and it might require purchasing some sort of a license of some kind to do those edits.
Well, I don't know if it's the license so much. I mean, even if we got a license, then you have to know how to use it.
Use it, right?
So, yeah, I don't know. Maybe if we keep $4,000 or $5,000 in there, maybe that's enough for someone to do kind of editing.
All right, so, and if it's, and
I don't know.
if new information comes in between now and Friday, then, that number might not be necessary. So and when you say dilemma, we have editing issues that need to be done, but anything else on the master plan is, in terms of goals, is implementation. What
Yeah,
else?
I mean, that part we can do ourselves.
Okay.
Right.
All right.
I have the old charts of those.
Yeah.
So under master plan update, do we just want to pencil in, what's $2,000?
Well, yeah, I don't know. I tried 4 or 5, I think.
Yeah. I'd like to see some still in there.
All right, so interim wise, we'll put 5 in, and then hopefully between, maybe tomorrow or whatever, we'll have a more succinct narrative and what that looks like. And I think engineering was mentioned, but I think engineering consultant.
Yeah, I mean, I think that one, at least for this year, we could put that at 0 or $1 or whatever.
On the engineering consultant, the 310 line item?
I mean, the purpose for that line item was, as you go through the year, you never know what kind of program might come up that you want to take advantage of, and if you don't have any money in that line item, so we've used it a few times. But if we're going to ask for 20 for impact fee and then another 4 or 5 for master plan, I think that's a fairly ambitious ask already, so I wouldn't.
And there'd be nothing deleterious by calling it 0, right?
Usually you're better off keeping $1 in there, just to keep it open.
We'll call it $1.
Yeah, all at once.
Generally what we do.
Now, the circuit rider one, I mean,
Yep.
right now with RPC, there's an availability issue. And just for the record, I want to say that I was very satisfied with the circuit rider program. I do like having a relationship with RPC. I did speak to the director and conveyed that, and that, we've been happy with their work product. And that in the event that, they were to hire somebody. I mean, I guess the issue was that maybe the people that they were entertaining, they didn't have a depth of resume that they were comfortable putting an offer in front of them. But in the event that there was availability, I've said, at least, from my perspective, that I'd like to be considered. They said if they approached us and said that, we have we have a circuit rider that, are you interested? And I said that, keep us in mind. So.
Has he said anything more?
No. Last time I talked to him, again, it was in the context of economic development. It's
Yep.
Mr. Roche. And this was in conjunction with this grant And I said that if there was something that came up, that grant-wise or such that was sort of economically development themed, I said we'd definitely be interested. And I believe he was attending some event in Salem at the time in which to talk about economic development. So
So you want to keep that line item?
Yes.
We should probably start from the top and go down each one, right?
Yeah. I was
We're
trying to
jumping
hunt all the
around.
way
Let's
around.
start from each one and,
yeah.
Can I ask one question? Do we only look at costs on these, or are we looking at the fees we're collecting? Where does that show up?
We don't have revenue on here.
All right, so the new guy asked a dumb question. Okay.
Well, I mean, if you impact fees, but those are the scheduled impact fees, that's in the town report, right?
yes.
Yes.
Okay, so if you were to consider that some sort of revenue.
But doesn't everything go into a planning board account?
No.
General fund.
I don't think
It'll
so.
go to the
No.
general fund.
Yeah, unless it's an enterprise account of some kind.
Yeah, it'll go to the general fund.
But is there some segregation within the general fund?
I mean, you can look to see where the monies came from, but it'll go into the general fund. It's like recreation.
Yeah,
The
yeah,
money they
no.
bring in, that's where that goes.
No, I get the account. I was just wondering, sometimes because we're talking about costs here that fees offset. So I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, is it?
Yeah, I've asked a couple times to have
Yep.
one additional column that says
Yep.
revenue.
Yep.
Everybody thought it was a good idea, but nobody ever does it, so. And after you ask 10 or 15 times, you kind of give.
Why
up.
ask 16, right? No, but if,
It makes sense. I know.
Yeah.
I'm used to looking at things in a context of kind of, if we're spending money, okay, is this offset?
Yeah, or what's the
exactly.
percentage, all that, right?
Yeah, right.
Exactly.
Why would it go into an enterprise fund?
Yeah, I mean.
I'm not sure of the requirements. I thought in the RSA's, there's some sort of segregation.
Take that.
I could be misinformed.
All right.
All right, that was just my question.
We'll just start at the top, I guess, but again, we don't have a lot of variability over.
No, we don't, but
So
if
it's
you
just going
got,
to
but
be.
if you got to
Yeah.
submit, you might
Yeah.
as well go through each one, right?
All right, so I guess the first one, line 110, 110, permanent positions. Do we just indicate that what it was last
Yeah, I
year?
think that's what it is, and
I mean, it's,
they'll look at it, and if there's
We have no
anything
idea.
contractual,
Yeah.
where somebody had to, get a cost of living
Right.
raise or whatever it is, and that would change, right?
so same thing with part-time positions, 120. Budgeted for 2,400.
Who
Yeah,
who
we get
does
the
decide the
actuals, though. The
salaries?
actuals is,
I'm just curious.
goes in close to double that, and we still got a couple months to go.
All right.
You've got 5 more months to go, and you're already.
So I put the same, the 2025 requested, I make the same as 2024 budget.
All right, so we're not doing any type of,
Well, it's kind of.
we don't have any information
I mean, if
to
the.
do that, right?
If the selectmen agree, everyone's going to get a 5% raise or
Right.
something, then that
Right.
kind of is in their budget, not.
And then that'll get changed before it goes to the budget committee.
Okay. All right, so 140 overtime, 2,500 for 2024. So just carry that over. Engineering consult, we indicated what, 0
One.
or $1,
One.
sorry.
Fine.
Then you gotta remember too, it's a bottom line budget too at the end of the day.
Yeah, it's, like I said, we're, just looking at. I guess we could carry the circuit rider number over with the idea that, I mean, if people
Hope we
say
get
that
it.
we're not going to get it, then if it gets zeroed out, then that's not no one's,
We gotta
Right,
hope.
but it's definitely worth having.
Yeah, we definitely want.
yeah, I mean, if it's not there though, then
Mhm.
that's the reality.
Yep.
I mapping. That's 315. Just indicate. 5,000.
Are we doing any mapping? Is that the plan or?
We've spent 4,300 so far already this year. then.
Yeah. That's just through GIS, right?
Yeah, that's what it says.
What are they doing?
Exactly, where is it?
I think we get GIS support from, kind of share it with assessing from CAI.
Okay.
Some.
Is that just like, so we're on some sort of, retainer or fee schedule?
I think so.
Yeah.
It's
All right.
contract.
Been pretty consistent through the last few years.
Yeah, it looks like the same. So,
Yeah.
okay.
All right, so notices and publications, 550. That's, that's just sort of the ebb and flow of our,
That would be your
Yeah.
offset for revenue, Dan.
And
Yep.
that's been consistent.
I have OF
Yeah.
on my list.
Oh, yeah, that's a wash with,
Yeah, right.
so 2,700 is really.
planning board dues. Now, not planning to use in 2023. All right.
Don't we usually do
Probably
that?
put $1 in there.
We're looking at
You
it
wanna-
all of them.
Yeah, I mean, the two organizations that we're most interested in it, and NHMA, I don't know why I
Yeah.
have trouble putting that, and RPC, but those get out of, those dues get paid from another budget, so they're not in our budget, which is why it's all, that would be like the American Planning Association or some other organizations like that.
So what is it usually? I mean, what is it up to now?
It's usually based on per capita.
It is.
The RPC
Okay.
dues, yeah.
Okay.
It's $1, $1, $2
Okay.
per
I think it
capita,
went
so
up, yeah.
Yeah.
It's
RPC. I
about
think, went up.
8,000.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, yeah, that's, yeah. 'cause it wasn't
And
that
HMA is quite a bit more, but you get
Okay.
a different set of services
long. Okay,
from them.
all right.
Office supplies, I'm sure that's fixed, right?
Yeah, I mean, it has been the last few years, right?
Still use paper, right? Postage. All right, so.
Saying that's pretty much a wash.
There's another offset, Dan.
Yeah.
I have that marked too.
I just want to make
Books
sure
and
you keep it up.
periodicals. We don't get any books and periodicals.
Does not look that way.
Yeah.
We used to get a book.
Well, one of the things too is I saw at the ZBA meeting when they were going through their budget that Dee had kind of given the opinion that maybe that postage had to be increased because
It went up.
it was a
Oh,
gap.
yeah.
Yeah, it's gone
There was
up.
an increase this year.
Yeah,
Right, definitely.
so we should definitely do the same, look at our fees.
Revenues are collected to offset costs. Okay. Yeah, I don't have a rationale. Did they mention what the percent increase was?
They did, but I wasn't, I just happened to hear it,
Yeah.
so.
I mean, the big expense is to send out registered mail with certified, whatever the heck.
Yeah, when you have to do special.
Those are like $8 a piece.
We can just match whatever,
But
I mean,
the
it's,
developers,
Yeah,
the
then they get
applicants
reimbursed.
pay for that
Yeah.
postage, so. The number of letters and so forth that the planning board originates to send to people is, I don't have any idea what that is, but I
Yeah.
guess it's
Right.
fairly small.
All right, so,
Okay.
okay. Periodicals, like I said, I guess. Equipment purchase, a lot of equipment being not
Yeah, geez.
purchased. So it looks like it's been consistent over time. So for planning board mileage, 801. So carry just 200 from 2024.
Yeah.
Same logic for 870 recording fees. Though. All right. So we already did the master
That's
plan update. We just put 5K into there because there might be a question of incompatibility of software, so we just need to look into that.
Oh,
I mean,
okay.
that number might not be relevant. And impact fees, a placeholder of 20,000.
Yep.
All right.
Yep.
And we don't need to do anything to, I mean, is it just enough to say that we made these updates, or should we just, do we need to take a vote on it?
I don't think we have to
Well, you
take a
figure At the end
vote.
of the day,
No,
We don't have to take a
it's all
vote.
up to the budget committee what goes through.
right. It goes there anyway.
What's that?
Because the budget could.
All right. All right, next on the agenda, zoning amendment workshop. And I guess, this was from a couple meetings ago, correct? Where we had, Dan and Lori got together and kind of went through. So if you guys, either one of you want to just sort of take the lead on this and tell us what we're looking at, and then just sort of move from, what your methodology was and just move from the front to the back.
Yep.
That's the way I look at it. I think before we do anything though, I think it is worth noting that, again, there was a cover letter that, that when we do this type of work, I think it does make sense that, part of the decision-making would be just, parenthetically to note what departments would be, we might want to consider consulting and such.
I think, I think I put that in there, didn't I?
It's on the.
Yeah, I'm just reiterating the cover
Yeah.
letter that came with it, so.
Yeah.
All right, so,
Well, I think first thing is there's obviously a lot here. It was a casting a wide net. And there, as a business owner in town, there is, elements here that relate to, businesses that I own. So I think the requirement is generally, if we're going to have any discussion, I disclose, so the impact is I own a farm. And there is a zoning ordinance in here that deals with agriculture. There's actually two, commission. And also, I have in the past on that farm engaged in homestead food operations. We don't do that currently. But as I looked at the whole lot ordinances, those are the two. So obviously, I'm not going to engage in any vote or I'll recuse myself on any of that, but we'll start with that.
yeah, so I think if we go through this, with an eye towards, see the rationale, if it's something that we want to consider, for proposed zoning amendments or what, then, maybe just by, a consensus or just to indicate that, mark this one for consideration.
Right.
Right, and then, so that once we do have, let's say, a body of work that we've at least, designated as such, then, obviously we'd push it through, legal and, and maybe have some input from some department heads if we feel that that's.
The thought is exactly that, is to get wherever we want, this thing gets skinny down before we go engage council. If something's not making the cutting board here, there's no reason for council to look at it. But first is to go out to anyone that's affected, so let the health inspector, let anyone, the building inspector, let them look at what this is. And there may be aspects here that appear as a zoning ordinance that may be better in some other ordinance, maybe the town code, that we may want to consider also. So
So I think we should just look at it as an exercise that we should feel comfortable with
Yep.
doing as a board. So, all right, take it away.
Am I doing this, Laurie, or?
Yeah. You're the secretary.
So the first Z25, proposed Z25 one, and I didn't add all the statutory language, I focused on just getting, was essentially to kind of collapse some of the various pieces that were already in the ordinance. And two was, and I saw this when the amendments were getting put in for this year, is we're prisoners of old numbering. And by the time this gets into the ordinance, you're Z25.1.5.1. And, so I put in I would recommend a housekeeping clause, whether this is the exact language can be, obviously, but that's what this does. And it comes right up front. So it allows us to, if there are typos, if that's anything that doesn't change the substance of the ordinance. And this comes right from the town of Bow. And I will tell you, as a stylistic, given that the head of the NHMA legal is from the town of Bow, I kind of picked their ordinance to start looking at like things that I thought might make sense. And then I just moved the severability clause and the effective dates clause that were in other parts of the zoning ordinance to right up front. So I can just go through them and tell you what the motivation was, and then we can, get through 5 or 6 of them and then hammer away at them if you want.
That sounds good. And if anyone has any questions, just please interrupt.
Second is all the definitions, and they all relate to the proposed changes. I had seen correspondence that we were, there was some concern whether we had a definition of accessory short-term rental, whether we want one. I stuck some word in there that was, I had some wording in there that at least addressed it. A lot of the things are just to, define what the building code is, define what the people are. And again, I used the basis of what was in other zoning ordinances. The big thing that I kind of looked at, and I used the economic development survey. I also looked at the number of small business starts in Plastow, and it's virtually non-existent. And I thought that we might want to take a real hard look at what gets done in homes. I'm recognizing that, Hewlett Packard was started in a garage, was to try and essentially define what a home operation was, and then create some strata, if you will, that some things are allowed by right without having to go through special exception. Some things would be allowed through conditional use permit. And that's another big aspect of the proposed changes, was to create, a fairly disciplined conditional use process in the town, where things would become before the planning board.
What would be an example of that? I'm just curious when you say a condition.
Well, like a home business, where, and the difference between a home occupation, if you will, and a home business is degree. So in a home occupation, there's generally no evidence that a business is being conducted on that property, whereas a home business, there is, there could be such. That would have to come before the planning board.
Right.
We use, one of the struggles when I was looking at the zoning ordinance was we define all these terms and we don't necessarily always define them within the ordinance. Now, that may be a matter of just convention. I don't know. It's pretty consistent, so I assume there was a reason. But anywhere you see the word home, we go look at Article 10, that's where a lot of that gets played around with. I took the definition of districts essentially from the noise ordinance. It sits there, but it doesn't go anywhere else. So I kind of, we talk about things as permitted in any residential district, but we don't define it within the ordinance proper. That's all this does. And it ties everything to the tables, so we didn't have to create a new ordinance. So I would looking through this particular one without looking at the ordinance sections as a whole doesn't do you much, going through each individual definition.
Okay.
There was space here for the prime wetlands. I know Tim's working on that. So somewhere that has to be worked into this. And to me, that should be one that doesn't get left on the cutting floor. We need to do something. It's just mine. Obviously, I've disclosed that I'm biased on the agritourism one. I wrote the ordinance, so there are aspects here that I think needed to be corrected. A chunk of them were typos that I tried to get corrected before the ordinance got printed last year, but didn't. But most of it is just to fix definitions and to clarify what's used. And the only reason I changed the definition of a craft distillery is because the math doesn't work. So if you recall the original brew pub, winery, small scale winery, the like, all the limits on those, and those are limits because in the licensing categories in the state of New Hampshire, there are no limits, other than a brew pub or a microbrewery, as I call it. In this case, it was to make the top line revenue limit all the same. So that's all it does. And I, to the extent someone wants to see the math on that, I can easily provide it. In Z25-5, again, this is the byproduct of some of the other changes. And they all go through all that, so that home occupation is a permitted use, home office is a permitted use. And home office is, I go down to my office in the morning and there's no evidence. You would never know. I got a phone, I've got a computer. I don't know why we require a special exception for that. That doesn't make a lot of sense. There's no disturbance. There's no anything. We're just using a piece of our home. So that was the motivation there. The motivation on this home operation was to make this stuff a little bit easier to navigate.
Appreciate that. Small business owner.
So virtually all and in this one too, we were, Laurie's raised from last year. Do we want to combine C2 with MDR? So I did a spreadsheet. Of course I didn't. I think it should have been included in part of the things, which I just took, the permitted uses, the allowed by special exception, the areas and dimensions for C2, the village center, and the MDR. And anything in red is generally what's different between. C2 and VCR are virtually are identical. It's just where the cutoff is for the most part, and multifamily is not allowed in VC.
So Lori, C2, where you say that home business shall be permitted through a conditional use permit, what's that now? I mean, home business in C2.
Is again, it's the same,
Yeah,
it
the
carries
same.
the home
office
home
shall be a permitted-
occupation operation through every, it's the same in every place where home occupation was allowed.
All right, so.
So it's not unique to the combination of, the proposed combination of C2 and MDR. I mean, the challenge I see with this is you got a 50%, lower building height. You got a 10%, increase in the front setback,
I have a question.
Yeah.
On C2, home business shall be permitted through a conditional use permit. So in that situation now, as it stands, what does someone have to do for a home business?
So right now, it's a home business it's defined as home occupation so they have to go down and apply for a license.
Right.
So under this, they would still do it. They would still have to apply for the license. Now they have to go in front of the ZBA for a special exception. Because if you look at in each one of those districts, home, if you will, home occupancy is what it's
So
called.
they would come before the planning
Come
board for
before
the
the
Now
conditional
they're
planning
going to
permit.
come
board,
before the planning
on
board
those two things.
for a conditional use permit.
Yeah.
So it's either go to the ZBA, now you're taking away from the ZBA and taking it to the planning board.
On just those,
That.
Yeah.
out of those four, by stratifying it, we cut the home home office and the home occupation. You can do those by right. You don't have to come to anyone.
Yeah.
I know
But yes.
I had to come and get approval to run my business out of my house.
Exactly.
Whereas nothing actually changed. When I went to work for myself, nothing changed. I was already had a different company van. I worked for a different company. That van was in my driveway. It was the same. There's no difference, but yet I had to get special dispensation to use my own property. So
The notion I tried to keep was if there is visual, physical evidence that there's a business going on in a residential, that would require some oversight or some review. If there wasn't,
Where is that reflected? So the scenario you
it's
just,
always in the definitions.
okay.
yeah, it says storage, like no storage besides your vehicle, so you couldn't be storing machinery, I believe. I used to-
Yeah, and the thing to read is Article 10. That's the one that goes into, it's a lot there. So if we're thinking of that combining districts makes sense, is, you basically have C2 to MDR or you have C2 to Village Center. And the reason I think Tim had explained to me is the reason you cut it off at Bittersweet was to make it perhaps easier for traffic funding or to kind of distill any projects you wanted down to something more manageable. I don't know if I'm misphrasing it. That's,
But, I think the village center, the concept was pedestrian friendly. So we're hoping maybe, the state's always reluctant to lower the speed limit, but if you had a well-defined area, like the village center, that they might be more willing to reduce the speed a little bit. And I think the master plan, for is looking to have sidewalks on both sides of the street. Then when you're out of the village center, then you're in C2. I mean, it's the same road, but you don't have that, you wouldn't have that extra restrictions of trying to make that pedestrian friendly. Not that you want to make it dangerous, but probably don't want sidewalks on both sides of the street all the way down Main Street.
No, but you probably want one, you know?
Well, or, you know, a wide shoulder with a bike lane and combination bike lane and pedestrian area.
But again, that's all this shows.
Yeah.
And then taking from the housing inventory, do we want to allow 2 ADUs? No.
I don't think so.
Well, I think I'm there too, but we had that, again, I put it in there to have the conversation. And if we're going to use if we're going to ultimately have this grant, that's going to be one of the things we're going to look at anyways, I would suspect. So, that one can probably go. I think the state at some point in time is going to beat anyone to the punch on multiple ADUs.
Well, the ordinance, I'm forgetting if it passed or not. But it was only applicable if you had town water and sewer.
Yeah.
Right.
So
We
I
don't have the sewer.
didn't pay as much attention to that once that provision came in. But, the houses, along Main Street it's not big side lots. You start putting 2 ADUs on every house, good grief.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree, but I pulled that as the minimal thing from the land use.
Yeah. Well, it never hurts to have the discussion.
Yeah.
That's for sure.
Well, trust me, I live on Main Street,
Yeah, well, yeah.
Yep. But if I, tried to put more on that, I have a 2-acre lot still. Okay. So
25.
25/7 is the home operation.
Yep.
I think you need to really look at this, and if you haven't already, is to see, because this is the meat of, the basic proposal. There's a lot of definitions. Oh, I'm sorry.
Dan, going back to 25-6 on the second page, it looks like you guys have taken out property owner shall apply for a certificate of occupancy for any new tenant under the lease more than 1 year. What was the thought process around that?
Is just that once they're rented, what happens is right now is every time a new occupant comes in, you have to apply for a new occupancy permit. I'm saying once you don't have to do that anyplace else.
Does that protect the property owner though? So if they had some issue where they probably had to evict someone or had an issue where they needed to remove someone,
Yeah, I don't think
could they use that certificate as, just say your certificate of occupancy has been revoked, we need you to leave or something to that effect? Just
no,
think about it.
I don't think that's a bad question. I think, maybe it could be,
Yeah. I know it makes it easier for the property owner who's renting a space to do that, but it might also be
You
a
mean
protection.
revoking the occupancy permit?
It might be a protection for the building owner
Right, if you can't, because
if
the
they
rent,
need to remove someone from their property,
Right.
for
and,
example.
and the rules regarding tenants have been broadened and they're much more protective now, even in New Hampshire than they used to
Yeah.
be. So, yeah,
Just a thought.
yeah, no, I
Thanks.
think it's a good one. And another thing, and this is kind of near and dear to my heart, if you put 20, like, mostly women, in a room and ask them some of their frustrations beyond their husbands and boyfriends is, being unable, despite you can do this all throughout the state, is being unable to bake some brownies in their own kitchen
Right.
and sell them, because you can't do it in Plastow.
Correct. That's the way it is right now.
Brownies
Yeah.
for the Girl Scouts, all of them, that's.
I will tell you, I mean, I've heard that multiple times. And,
Yeah.
one of the things here is to allow us. And I will tell you what's happening at the state. They're moving more and more to really broaden the definition of homestead foods, I mean, there's a interim study, one now on changing homestead foods to artisan foods and really broadening into, and this is one, quite frankly, that I think the health inspector should weigh in on.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yep. Yep.
Yeah, because I know now he has a form if someone wants to make brownies and bring it to an event.
Yeah.
They have to put in all the
Yeah.
ingredients
Yeah.
and fill that out, so.
which doesn't, again, this wouldn't absolve you of that requirement. You
Right.
have to do it by state,
You have to do
but
it by state.
it would just allow it to occur, in a home. I mean, this,
You definitely have to take a look at that.
yeah, no. Next one I proposed was the establishment of an agricultural commission. A lot of towns have them. I mean, I don't know, I know one year we took a look at establishing, I don't know if it was a historic district or heritage commission in the town that didn't kind of go anywhere.
It didn't pass.
Yeah, I don't know.
Wasn't that the one that we worked on, Beth?
Yeah, this one has to be selectmen's warrant.
Yeah.
You can't establish a agricultural commission through zoning.
I think you can through, because it's considered a land use.
Yeah, right. And so is the Conservation Commission, Land Use Board. Well, no, I'm sorry, they're not. But
No, it's not. Yeah, it's not.
There's
Conservation Committee.
no authority for a planning board to create other boards and commissions.
Oh.
So what,
We do it.
So,
Yeah, then this can go to the selectmen if they're interested.
right, so you could recommend it to the selectmen, I'm
Yeah.
sure we'd be
yeah, right, yeah.
And you look
Happy
at
to
it
put it
and
on
figure it
there.
out from there.
leave it up to the, the voters. Just as long as people are, excited about joining. I know we're going to start a commission and we don't have a lot of people to join it, so. But there's also a money aspect to this as well, so we'd probably need to have a budget, right? Because it does talk about having, or maybe that was,
No, you're right.
yeah, it does.
You're right. There is a
So we'd need
financial
budget
aspect to this.
line,
Yep.
or it'd probably fall under like
Yep.
planning or something.
So that's one.
Pick selectmen.
And then the other, media one here is the conditional use permits.
Yes.
All red.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, we don't,
A lot of wording on a bill.
we,
Yeah, okay.
this is all from the town of Bow.
Very interesting.
And again, it's something the planning board should consider. Is this something we want to do, not do? Do we feel like, we got too much on our plate? I mean, it's,
I think what you gotta do is look at it and kind of prioritize.
yeah, Yeah.
And say which ones do we definitely need to do.
yeah, because
As we all know, because we go through this every year, it's like,
Yep. I
we got
know.
20. Which ones have to get done?
How big do we want the ballot to be?
Right,
Yeah.
exactly.
Exactly.
well, obviously, one of the challenges when I took the training on like implementing zoning, it was clear that they said start off bigger and shrink it down.
Yeah.
In my view, people lose interest on one, never mind.
They lose interest before before they
Correct.
get to one,
Correct.
unfortunately.
And we can make topical descriptions,
Right.
that we don't have to put all of this in the
actual book, no.
the ballot, but still,
No.
it's to give it
a lot.
justice.
Well, I mean, there's only one place that I know of where we have conditional use permit, and that's regarding wetlands.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah, it's in the ordinance.
But there, the conditional use permit goes to the Conservation Commission. They evaluate it and send a recommendation back to the planning board. If there's a conditional use permit that the planning board is kind of in charge of, just put it in the zoning. I mean, what basis do you approve or deny the conditional use permit?
Well, isn't that driven by the statutory requirements of evaluating that conditional use permit? So there's the 10 standards that that you have to go through and evaluate.
I mean, if you're getting a conditional use, I don't know. It just seemed like that's a long way around to get to an answer.
Yeah, and
I read through here.
it may very well
A lot
be,
of work.
Let me see if I understand what you're saying, Tim. Is that, all right, you have the example of, let's say, Conservation Commission doing a conditional use, then it comes, they do a recommendation, comes to the planning board. But I guess, what was your point, saying this, why don't you just put it right in zoning?
Yeah, I mean, the planning board would send itself a conditional use permit to evaluate. So kind of cut out the administration of
All right, so you're saying that
Conditional
it's,
Well, isn't it, it would be in the zoning tables, wouldn't it? This is permitted via conditional use permit, just no different than special exception. It's just going to a different place. So it's in the zoning. This just goes through like the process we would go through to evaluate. At least that's how I looked at it, so. I mean, if you go back to the zoning ordinance, you can see where I just suggest that we move things out of the special exception, and it's really home business and home industry. Those are the two. But if we don't think we need it, then it can go.
admittedly, I have to probably understand it a little more.
The construction of
The
driveways.
other thing I looked at
Prime wetlands.
is just the whole kind of enforcement kind of aspect. Our zoning ordinance is fairly light on that. And so the idea, I just looked at, again, another ordinance to kind of see, and I looked at multiple ordinances to see, like, okay, what are other people doing? So That's all this is. And the only thing I could find generally in our ordinance was fines and penalties. And so I can take a look at that and see if this
So does
does.
this change anything? Like where you talk about zoning administrator, it looks like there's a hierarchy of designated enforcement.
Well, it gives it's either the code enforcement office, depend what you have. You know, if you have a zoning officer, a zoning administrator, they all kind of work together. It's who's ever in charge of administering the zoning ordinance. So if we have an administrator, it would seem to me that would be the zoning administrator. If we have a code enforcement officer that without an administrator, then they would be responsible for the code. I'm assuming their job description would drive what they're responsible
Right.
for.
Yeah, I'd be interested to see that.
So
It's a different.
take a look. Again, that's from the town of Bow too, so. On the ZBA, all I did was add the statutory language. You know, we had all this language in there on special exceptions, but virtually nothing in there on the other responsibilities. So I just took
Yeah,
again from the town of Bow. I just put this in there. I would admit on this one, I didn't go through and really tweak out everything. As when I was reading it again last week, there's probably some things that can kind of get combined or come out. It's kind of wordy, but, or whether we even think it's necessary. I mean, statutorily, we have what the ZBA should do. We have what special exceptions. We have all of that, you know. Does it make sense to have it also in our zoning ordinance?
well, I mean, those are in there because if we have an application and there's use requires a special exception or a variance because it doesn't meet the ordinances, then we send it to the ZBA. But, I mean, we can't define how the ZBA operates in any, like operation and rules of procedure. We can't do that for the ZBA.
Yeah, and we don't, this doesn't do that. It just says, you know, this is, they interpret the ordinance, they authorize, they do the things they do.
Yeah, but that's up to them to define
Yeah.
how they do that.
And the last two on the building code, this to me probably belongs, you know, in the hands of the selectmen. And a piece of it really, there was a new Senate bill that passed that establishes requirements. And I think, you know, to me, this one, if the board of selectmen's, you know, wants to take a look at something, this probably should be in their wheelhouse.
Yep, I would agree with that.
So,
It's a lot of work. Very interesting.
I mean, if there's other things we should be looking at, this is kind of one or two persons, you know, kind of view. Laurie and I went through all this, but, you know, I don't.
Well, the good thing is, we're looking at it, here it is, the first week in September, as opposed to November.
Yes,
Right.
you know, and we will continue.
And it gives
to.
us time to say, okay, yes, nay, you know.
Yeah, and just say, okay, hey, this is going over, you know, the selectmen will take a look at this and
Yeah.
do whatever they feel they need to do.
All right, so just kind of quickly looking at this, I mean, like 25/7, you know, we probably, if we wanted to, I mean, this looks like a pretty good candidate for something, you know, in terms of like home occupancy and things like that.
Well, and again, it's.
And then the health
convers-
inspector could be,
Yeah.
we could have comment from the health inspector on this.
I think they all should, you know, we should cast as
Yes.
broad a net as possible to get comments.
Right,
Yeah, but,
I agree. I think they're all necessary.
so the Agricultural Commission, I mean, again,
All
you have,
necessary.
if that's something, I got a note saying that, you know, for BOS
Yeah.
consideration. I mean, and, you know,
Just make sure you send it to the chair, not the vice chair.
do we have this one? Conditional use permits, I guess there's some, I think there was some good discussion on that. On hold in the sense that, are we just sort of, are we duplicating something that doesn't need? to be
Tim should
duplicated?
have a good whack at that. He probably has a better
take a
understanding
look
of
at.
the nuances than I think I
Yeah,
understand.
I mean, I just, you know, like if he wants, then so be it. This one on the zoning administration enforcement, I mean, this looks like this is just sort of housekeeping. But
Well,
I hate that term, but
no, but there's, right now, there's no real mechanism in our zoning ordinance about how the process of enforcement.
okay. So, I mean, hypothetically, what are you talking about? What's that?
Someone files a complaint.
Okay.
How do you go about that? Who does that? There is a zoning, so there's some ambiguity. Someone, you know, who makes the decision as to, you know, does everything get brought before the ZBA? Does everything, you know, does the code enforcement office? I mean, people in the town should have some responsibility to make
Know who to go.
determinations,
Right.
you know, without having everything come to a board.
All right. Do we have a sense, Bill? A sense that, is there anyone that we want to loop in on that? Is that worth looking at, or is that, you know, just controversial?
Well, Controversial, all depends on who you talk to, right?
Of course. What's for dinner tonight could be controversial. I mean, I just, you know, generically, you know, I've always had an open question about, like, you know, in terms of, you know, site plan enforcement. It is an open question. Yeah, I understand that we have a consultant. The consultant has an in-house, you know, in-house staff that evaluates, you know, a plan as it's implemented. Okay, but that consultant doesn't have any type of enforcement authority. So hypothetically speaking, if a site were being developed and there was a complaint, you know, I guess to that point, I would like to know, like, you know, who do you call? And if the person that you call, let's say code enforcement, says that it's not their job to do it. I think something like this would clarify that. I mean, that's been sort of,
Well, we would probably have to, you know, tweak this.
Tweak it, right.
You know, just remember, I mean, there's a whole section in the building code about occupancy permits, you know, it's
Right.
just, so at the end of the day, there's on our occupancy permit, the town's occupancy permit, there's a sign off from the planning board representative. So in terms of enforcing, you know, the site plan and everything, is when someone signs off on behalf of the planning board, they're saying that, you know, all the conditions of the site plan have been met. That's how they're granting the certificate of occupancy.
Yeah.
So I mean, to the extent we want to make that clear, I just don't know if you do that in the ordinance or it's somewhere else. It's in the site plan regulations or something. I can.
maybe
I can.
mark this one as think about it.
A lot of work, very nice work.
And, all right, and the other one, like 2511, I think the discussion on that was that ZBA makes these decisions or determines those rules and things like that.
Again, look at that in context with the special exception regulations that are already in the
Right.
ordinance.
Yeah.
It seems to me there's a piece there and there's more that needs to be added.
Yeah, 2512, I got a note that says in BOS hands perhaps, if that's something that,
Yep.
you know, along with agriculture.
Yeah, both, those last two,
Yeah,
they can figure out how they want to
all right.
comply.
Do you want these emailed and sent to the board or not?
Here would fall into that as well.
Yeah, so 12, 14, and Agricultural Commission, probably just kick it over to Board of Selectmen to kind of look at, contemplate it or not. All
Yeah, just send Jay and myself.
right.
Okay, you
I
had
think
that, then you'll go
for the
on
board, right? Should be 12,
Yeah.
14, and whatever the ag is.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
we could somehow get a 10 or less.
Yeah, I mean,
I mean,
it's just, and maybe we don't need to do any of them, but it's just, you know, just sort of a process where we're looking at it and saying that no, yes, maybe.
Like I said, I'm glad we're looking at this on September 4th. Starting the process early.
I would say just, you know, somewhere along like a little, just to be formal, you know, we recommend you take a look at these or something like that in your note, you know.
Okay,
So we pass it, you know, obviously we're on TV and talking about it.
all right, so
The official.
do you want me to just say it just out loud that we're going to recommend that we, I don't see what you're saying.
If anybody's
Did you
out
want,
there.
did you want it sent in?
If anybody's out
email or-
there.
All right, so I guess what we're resulting in this process, at least, the following proposed or amendments to zoning or updates that are probably more appropriately to be discussed by Board of Selectmen. So I'm probably going to forward a proposed Z25-8 to establish Agricultural Commission to the Board of Selectmen. Proposed Z25-7, that speaks to home occupancy for the purposes of looping in the health inspector.
Oh, okay, okay,
Or
sorry.
just, you know, I think that's something that the health inspector should probably publicly
Yeah,
comment on.
he should weigh in on that. I mean, that's his wheelhouse.
All right. Let me see, Z2512, again, this speaks to building code enforcement process. All right, so that's something that I think that the BOS can evaluate and see if that's something that is worth pursuing.
Send it to the building department as well.
All right. CC building. And what's this?
So we still get to go over those, some of these, right?
Z2514, the building code of Board of Appeals.
I would argue
Board of Selectmen or?
if they're going to the Board of Selectmen, their
It's Board of
job.
Selectmen.
Oh, yeah, those ones we.
Yeah, no, I'm talking about the others.
The others, yeah, the other ones.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah, the
Building
other
Board of
ones, like you
Appeals,
have the
Board of
health
Selectmen.
inspector will weigh in, say what he said.
Yeah.
Opinion.
Yeah, just get their input.
Yep,
Right. And I think I missed the agricultural one.
7.
Yeah,
Right.
so-
Really? It's 6 and then 7's missing. All right, good. All right, that's good enough. All right. So next on the agenda, is there anything else anyone wants to comment on before we move on?
No, good start, though. It's a lot of work
Was very.
by
a lot of
Dan and
work.
Laurie.
A
A lot of work,
Dan.
thank you.
Huge amount of work.
Laurie, was, a lot of work.
There's another zoning discussion list. There's
At the
another-
very end.
the
That was
thing
at the
on-
very end, you had one, yeah, I
Oh,
saw
zoning,
that.
before we move off of zoning.
It was just a single paper.
About signs.
Right here.
What was it?
Signs, everywhere
Signs,
sign.
About signs.
Maybe it was a different font, okay.
Well, I had a nickel for every time we've changed the sign ordinance.
So what are we doing on the sign ordinance here?
I don't know. I didn't, can I
Into
see
this
it?
one? All right. This is 2025 zoning
got
amendment
it tonight.
discussion list.
Is this the one?
Yeah, that's,
It looks-
Oh, okay, that's,
Yep.
yeah, that wasn't for me. I didn't
No.
see that.
Oh, okay.
Where did it come from?
Yeah.
Saying, what the hell did I include?
Might
Where'd that come from?
have come from D, I don't know.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Oh,
Um,
so what was the purpose of this one?
trying to read it and figure it out.
Yeah.
it looks like it looks like it's going to take out the word content.
all right.
Yeah, that's one of them. Then it looks like
Taking out Plastow Planning Board.
fee schedule, and then adding in the building construction of the Plastow code.
Oh, how about if we read the explanation?
That might help.
Was to change all references zoning from Plastow fee schedule and Plastow fee schedule, planning board fee schedule.
Yeah, that's
That's all that was on.
it's just moving the fee to the right place.
Right.
Yeah, that's all, it
Exactly.
really, that's all it
That's what
really
I
is.
said, yeah. What it was.
I mean, this isn't really controversial, right? I mean, we can agree
No.
with that.
I would say no.
No, it's
So,
nothing. It's just funny how it just, slipped in though, but it was,
that's
nothing,
fine.
nothing.
All right, so,
I don't even know if I have it.
Well, that's it.
Yeah, you want to see it?
Simple.
It's just
thanks, Tim.
takes out the word content.
Yeah, I
What is this?
don't think it was in my packet, that's all.
Thomas for that.
So next on the agenda
This is
is
the planning board, this one? What's that?
subdivision site plan regulation review.
Read this whole thing into
The
the.
draft thing, this thing?
Yeah.
Don't laugh, that's terrible.
Can we move the, because I haven't had it, I don't know about all you, but I hadn't had a chance to read that, the whole,
Draft thing here?
Yeah.
This- Yeah, no, I haven't either.
because isn't this?
What are we talking about here?
That's
Yeah, it's the converted, it's the combination, right?
hot off the press at 5 o'clock.
Yeah.
this afternoon.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, there was this one and then there's the draft.
Now,
Go through both of those?
okay, so this is the end product of what you were working on, Tim, correct?
Right.
Okay, and this was just looking at making sure that whatever was living in this side is,
Yeah, so the goal was to combine subdivision site plan in one document.
Okay.
So there was, a lot of duplicate language across.
Oh, I see that chart is inside the
So-
book.
And then this converted section, you have the old numbers and the new numbers,
okay.
just for reference, yeah.
Yep.
So in the big document, there's a few changes in red that are new. They were not in either the subdivision or site plan, but things that were sort of missing or needed explanation. So those are in red, and there's The ones that are in green are the ones from the draft that Lorian and put together, I guess. So hopefully those are all incorporated into the one document.
I'm sorry, what was green?
Yeah, I don't.
The ones that Laurie and I were playing around with. Okay. It's a lot of work.
That was a lot of
All
work,
right,
too.
so I'm just, just following the colors here. You said that the ones in green, give me an example of what's in green, just so that.
I think they were was it the attachments?
Oh, the attachment.
Go to page,
This one here, you mean, the attached one?
Yep.
That's blue.
I thought it was
more like a
blue
teal.
too.
Actually, I won't be able to,
Blue.
I know who I'm not driving with.
they're in there somewhere.
I'm saying, where's
I
the
just looked,
green?
I just looked at it, was close. It was the next color over. I assumed it was right.
Blue.
I just knew it wasn't red.
That's green.
Right.
maybe my eyes are tired.
I'm gonna have to.
That's not the amendment to Chapter 235 subdivision regulations, right? You're not,
Those,
that's,
Planning staff
Should
assists
all
the
be in
planning
here.
board, yeah. Planning staff. Planning board, I'm summarizing staff review, yeah, it is. Proposed amendments to site plan review. So our duties, that was one. That's both of them. What are we supposed to do with this?
Well, we would adopt it into our site plan
Who
regulations.
worked on this? This was Tim,
Tim and Dee.
well, they can.
okay?
So, obviously, too much. So my thought was, at our next workshop, kind of
Yes.
step everyone through
So we can read it.
the whole document. Or, we're not
so,
gonna read it word for word, but.
Why not?
Oh,
Well,
all right, so next
But-
workshop, you want to go through and sort of,
yeah,
if we agree with it or not, yeah, just, right?
Yes.
Why not?
sounds good. We're gonna do that now.
Good to me. No, I don't think it 20 of 9.
So this is a tremendous amount of work
It is. It's
and
lot
a
of
long
work you
term,
guys did.
long time in
Both
coming.
of you.
Yeah.
Yep. This is a
Well-
lot of work.
So for next workshop, we'll dedicate time to this?
Go read it.
Does that have to be read into the record is what we're saying, or no? Okay.
We'll take turns.
I'm listening to things
We'll
in
take turns
stereo
on the
here, so.
pages.
I mean, at some point, we'll have to have a public hearing to
Right.
officially adopt it, but, I
Right.
don't know that we're obligated to read everything word for word.
I think just.
All right, so next meeting, workshop wise, we're going to go over this, and then in the future, we'll perhaps have a public hearing to adopt it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Our November workshop, I'll be somewhere between Tucson and Chicago, so
Will you be in a train,
I won't be here yet.
traveling by train?
The train has Wi-Fi, right?
Some do and some don't. Along the Northeast Corridor, Wi-Fi is pretty good, actually.
You're away, you're on vacation. You don't
But
have-
you get away from the Northeast, it's pretty spotty.
Yeah.
What do you travel on? The Wichita, Topeka, and Santa Fe line, or?
Well, you take the Lakeshore Limited, Boston to Chicago. That's one night on the train, and the Texas Eagle from Chicago to New Orleans, and then it picks up, kind of combines trains with the Sunset Limited, and that goes to New Orleans to Tucson.
Should have done it during Mardi Gras in New Orleans.
Oh. Yeah, never
Or let us know if you run into Arlo Guthrie.
bucket list. I think that went off my bucket list at about age 35 or so.
My son chose his junior year down to Tulane, so he got to see everything. It was his choice.
I've been to New Orleans a few times. That was a fun place to be.
So they say. All right. The old business that we want to talk about. I'll just reiterate again, with respect to, I think it's a gap in our process, right, in terms of defining if we accept something as complete. Now, I understand that. I think I'll ask the question right up. Can the board dispute a determination of zoning? And because it was alluded that if we disagreed with, let's say, a determination, what's the appeals process? And I guess that's what I want to understand, what the appeal process is. And if there is an appeal process, we should probably incorporate that into our procedures, just so that it's there and we know what it is.
Yep. The process is we make an appeal to the ZBA on an administrative decision from the zoning officer.
All right, so in terms of a procedure perspective, okay, something comes before us, we have our completeness checklist. It's complete in the sense that the specified material that we expect to see in it, it's in good order. We accept jurisdiction of it.
Yeah.
All right. Part of that jurisdiction that I, again, the proposed amendment to our procedures indicated that I think it makes sense that we have an affirmative determination from the zoning officer whether or not the said site comports with existing use and current use. All right, and that would just be something that's added to the checklist. Like we see it, it says it, we've accepted jurisdiction, and now, at that point that we have jurisdiction, we would be in a position to say that, we're going to challenge that assessment or not for whatever reason. Then what happens? I mean,
We go to the ZBA to see if they agree with us or not.
in terms of but there's an applicant that's in front of us that we've accepted
Yeah.
jurisdiction for. Do we continue the process until that is adjudicated? And, just.
Well, I think I would inform the applicant that we were going to do that. And should we prevail at the ZBA, then we have an application for the planning board in front of us that no longer has a valid permitted use. So our only action we could take then was to disapprove it because it's not a permitted use. So then that would put an end to that application.
On that night, you wouldn't accept it, and it would go to the ZBA to determine whether we were right or not.
No, you
No, it's already.
I
accept
just
it,
want to trying to.
accept it, open the
We're
public.
speaking generically in terms of the
That's what I'm
process.
doing, I'm just trying to.
Well, but you don't necessarily have to open the public hearing at that meeting, right?
Right. You
Well-
shouldn't have to.
You're not required to.
The thing is, if you don't open the public hearing that night, then you have no way of letting the abutters know when the next hearing is. So then it would be the responsibility of the planning board to send out abutter notices for when the next
Okay,
So
yep,
we did that a couple times last year. We had a really full agenda.
Right.
We accepted it as complete, which was, 2 or 3 minutes, opened the public hearing, and then only thing we did was continue.
Continuing. yeah.
okay.
So, and again, just sort of procedurally speaking, just so that we're not, that you open a public hearing, we let's say there's a question with, zoning, and, you're on a 65-day clock. And presumably, if for whatever reason, there's no action taken within that 65-day clock, by, let's say, the ZBA in this instance, then, we would be in a position, if a clock ran out and an extension's not granted or what, we would be in a position where we could deny it, but without prejudice, in the sense that, the clock's run out, and, if it's remediated at some point, then they can refile without having to substantially change things.
Yeah.
That's my understanding.
Yeah, so if we appealed to the ZBA and we lost, so they didn't agree with our decision. So depending on the timing of our public
Right.
hearing and the ZBA
That's
schedule, I mean, you could lose 30 or 40 days.
Right, easy.
The applicant can grant us an extension. They'd be fairly foolish not to do that, because if they didn't and the clock runs out, we
They have
have
to
no
start
choice
over.
but to deny, because we didn't, I don't think an applicant's ever refused to not extend it. It was,
I think we had one that threatened not to extend, which was strange.
When you deal with the public, you never know what you're gonna get.
No, you don't.
So the only, so I'm just saying that I don't necessarily see this in our procedures. And that's sort of the avenue that I'm coming
So
from.
you want it documented, basically,
Oh, yeah.
like, this is it.
Right, just so that,
I hear you.
just so,
I hear you.
so it should be, if we were, whether or not we want to push it into the completeness portion of it, but if we take completeness as being strictly a checklist-driven event, then, I think as this amendment that we have in front of us indicates, is that, we're looking for a form where, let's say, the appropriate officer says that the use comports with the allowed use, and it's being operated in according to the current use. And then with those elements there, we accept it as complete. But then, the question of where we're going to handle questions of zoning then is spelled out, where it's like,
Well, you have essentially two steps compressed. You
Right.
have the
I
acceptance
wanna
as
pull-
completion, and then you have, do we agree or not agree,
Agree or not agree.
with the
Right.
determination.
No, I understand what you're saying, have it in there, right? This board may understand that, but 3 years from now, you could have a completely different board that doesn't understand it, but it's in the document, so it's spelled out.
right. So that it's just that's clear, and it's like we understand that, and and just go from there. So, maybe if we were to add some language to this, and then maybe like, next meeting or next workshop, circulate it around before we, if we want to adopt it or not. So, but I think that's the intent that they have, is that I think it just needs to be spelled out, affirmatively,
So you know what to do. I hear
so
you.
that we,
No, I agree.
I mean, we do have an obligation to have, how we conduct ourselves in our.
That's right.
That's all I had for sort of old business. Anyone have anything else?
Do we want to talk about the post office
Sure. All right.
quickly?
Yeah,
So there's some people that are willing to donate some things. And I think from another conversation, we got some labor. But we're probably going to need some help from the town. At least, not so much labor, but a truck maybe to haul the detritus, if you will, in front of the post office away.
Oh,
So let me just summarize here for a second then. Post office gave us the go-ahead that,
You did get to go ahead from that.
what's that?
You did get to go ahead. from
Yes.
to clean it up.
And, that whatever we want to do with the front, they're good with it. And of course, before anything's done, we'll go back to them and to sort of like, just sort of get an understanding that what we're going to do. But
that.
the
Yeah,
whole
you
front,
want them to sign off on what the
Yes.
things.
Yeah,
That's
Okay.
right. I
Right.
mean, before,
Danny
right,
doesn't have a truck?
what's that?
so,
Danny doesn't
well,
have a
let
truck?
me finish. Let me finish. So that we want to have everything ripped out, okay? I have potentially a landscaping company that's willing to donate, tools, all right, and then, probably some manpower to go in and do this. When they came down and looked at the amount of material there, they basically said that this is going to be a huge amount of material that's going to be moved out. So they were looking for basically a large dump truck and access maybe
That'd be
to
pretty big.
moving it to the town landfill. And I guess the only wrinkle is that the word Saturday kind of came up. So I think that's where we're at in terms of sort of presenting a solution for, we have, stuff that we were going to put in, like in terms of, we'll have the post office sign off and what it looks like, but we look like we can have trees and various other plants donated. Loam will be donated, from, and such. So I think it's an opportunity to make it look really good. It's just that
You know,
he seems to think
Yeah,
that
we
it's
did.
going to require quite a bit of trips to have it something deposited, so.
And some recognition from the post office thanking the town of Plastow for,
But I think they would, yes, naturally.
yeah.
okay.
So that's where I'm at, with respect to that, and it'd be, if something maybe could be worked out, if it's not necessarily with the town, if there are other interested parties that, people could put us in touch with, to basically haul giant juniper cuttings. All right.
I don't know if that's a request that someone would make to the town manager.
That's where
Is
we'd
that
have
where
to
you
go.
go?
That's where we'd have to go, right? 'Cause
Yeah.
It would have to be town resources.
Yeah,
Is it a large dump truck or a medium dump
you're
truck?
probably needing like a
Pretty big.
triaxle or something. I mean, there's a fair amount of, I mean, I
I
got some.
thought
equipment,
Freshwater
but
Farms would
not
have
enough
that,
to,
because they do a lot of that.
I know one business, but I would say it's not a triaxle dump, so.
All right, so I can probably summarize that and send it to the town manager, and, so that'd be greatly appreciated if that was available. Anything else? Am I forgetting anything?
No, just-
All right, then as of 8:53, I close the meeting. Thank you.
Okey-dokey.